Can you hear a big rumble on my end? Out of curiosity.
Sounds a little different.
Okay, I have a whole house fan running right now, so I'll turn it off before the meeting starts. That's what I was trying to figure out.
You just sound like you're far away for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe that's what it is, just background noise.
Yeah, it's this might be filtering like through noise cancellation a little bit, so that could be
Yeah.
what's happening is it's taking out some of my voice. So I'll just make sure I turn it off. I just wanted to check. Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. I'm gonna let people in.
Good morning. I think I'm on. Can you hear me? Perfect. Thanks, Carson. I'm going to keep my camera off. I've got some weird glitchy things happening this morning. We'll give it a few more minutes. It looks like we just have a few people online so far. All right, well, we've got 34 on. What's 35 now? It looks like we'll go ahead and get started, and we'll just add people as they come in. Just make sure that they're signing into the chat box. We can keep track of who's here. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the June NATA meeting. First off, we'll go ahead and just look at the approval of the April NATA meeting minutes. Any questions on that from anyone? I don't see any hands. Can we get a motion to approve?
This is Anita, so moved.
This is Joan, second.
All right. Thanks, Anita and Joan. If there's no opposition, we'll go ahead and accept approval of the minutes. I don't see any. Okay, let's go ahead and move to the approval of Westminster's Priority Project Edition. And we have that up here on the screen. Karen, was there anything to talk about with this?
Thanks, Chair. Just wanted to remind everyone that we have a priority projects list. There are 3 tiers to it. And 3 times a year, anyone from NATA can propose an addition or edits to the priority projects list. This was one that came in front of us earlier this year, and it's a request from Westminster. If there's anything specific, we can either ask Anita or Deborah Baskett to comment on this, but it's pretty self-explanatory.
Perfect. Does anybody have any questions about this addition to the priority project list? I do not see any hands, so we'll go ahead and move for approval. Can I get a motion to approve?
Move for approval. This is Joyce.
Second, this is Joan.
Thank you, Joyce and Joan. If there's no opposition, we'll go ahead and accept the motion. I don't see anything.
Thank you. And the next time that they can, anyone from NATA can propose changes is in September.
Perfect. Thank you, Karen. All right, moving right along. Let's go ahead and look at the Smart Commute updates.
Thank you. We're going to start with Catherine. So the first one is the Employer Traffic Reduction Program, E-Trip as some people are calling it. And all of our staff have been really immersed and engaged in this topic. And Catherine's going to give us a quick overview. It's a moving target.
Yes, I'll keep this very short because we have a big agenda. I wanted to let you all know that Smart Commute is in a coalition with the 8 other TMAs as a party to the rule. This allows us to influence the rule. As a coalition, we are advocating for phased employer compliance, starting with largest employers first, focusing on trips occurring during ozone hours, so the hours from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. We're advocating for tiered SOV rate goals based on the context that an employer is in, as well as their transit access at their work site. We're advocating for employee training, especially of those employee transportation coordinators. And we're also advocating for recognition of equity concerns among different types of workers, knowing that not all workers are going to be able to have access to programs like teleworking. Not to say that we're going to get all of these things, but these are the things that we're advocating for. So right now we're moving forward. We're trying to contact all large North area employers. And this is employers that have 100 or more employees at a single work site. We want to get in contact with these employers, explain what's happening and answer questions, identify what is happening at their work site as far as their industry type and the kind of situation that they're in. We also want to make sure that these employers are prepared to do an employee commute survey as soon as possible, because the data that we collect will be better in the fall than it will be in the first quarter of next year. So speaking of survey, E-Trip will require 3 things from employers. It'll require for them to register, self-register as E-Trip employers. It will require employers to conduct an employee survey with pre-specified questions. And this is going to be something that they have to do annually and have a very high response rate to the survey as well. And then the third thing that employers will need to do is prepare an E-Trip plan if they are not meeting the SOV rate goal. And this plan will simply articulate what the business is going to commit to do as far as changing policies or instituting programs to meet that goal. And so that will be due July 1st of every year. The draft rule is under review right now, and there are parties attempting to modify it and hopefully improve it. It will be reviewed by the Air Quality Control Commission at their August hearing, and that is when it is set to be reviewed and adopted. The AQCC is a regulatory authority for the rule, and then the Air Pollution Control Division, APCD, of the Colorado Department of Health and Environment, CDPHE, they are the division responsible for actually overseeing compliance of this rule. Now, Smart Commute is watching this very closely, and we're very involved. We have always worked with companies to do E-Trip plans on a voluntary basis, and we are well set up to help support employers through this process. We just want to start connecting with them now, and that's our primary objective at the moment.
I'd also chime in that this ETRP rule that will go into effect as a regulation next year is the outcome of the greenhouse gas emissions roadmap that was passed last year by the legislature. And it's one of the components to reduce emissions, particularly on the Front Range, which is out of compliance of air quality. So it starts in the Front Range, and our understanding is it will probably go across the state eventually, but begin in the non-attainment area of the Front Range, which is really from Fort Collins down to just north of Colorado Springs.
Thanks for the presentation. I know this is a hot topic for a lot of us, trying to figure out how this is going to look in our cities. And I know it's going to continue to be an interesting conversation. Anita, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Catherine, for that report and all your work on this. I really, know I've been following this closely. I was heartened to hear that you guys were able to agree on getting some equity as far as the type of work that workers do there and their need for cars. But I'm not sure I heard geographic equity in regards to access to transit, like available transit. How is that going to fall into the formula?
So what we're advocating for is tiered SOP goals that would recognize the fact that places are very different, that in a richly infrastructured place like downtown Denver in the central business district, they should have a different goal than people who are sited outside of downtown, especially people that don't have transit access. So there's been some informal conversations between the TMO coalition and the APCD staff, and it actually looks like they may be willing to go toward those tiers. Again, no promises. Of the things that we're advocating for, that sounds like something that they're willing to really consider. And I think what is helping is a lot of other people who have party status who are coming together in this conference. They are also bringing to light the fact that it's not fair for employers who are sited outside the downtown to be held to the same goal as a downtown employer. And many of those employers, if we're going to talk about a uniform goal, they're meeting the goal. So it's not challenging them to make progress, and it's overly challenging people who are not in the right context to be able to meet that goal. It's too much from the offset. Maybe as we move the bar lower and lower, we can meet that goal eventually, but that is something that we're advocating for. We've been advocating for over a year now, as this e-trip process has moved forward from the RAC to the state. So, and that one, I personally feel hopeful based on the conversations that have been relayed to our coalition members from the division staff.
I really appreciate that. And, I do think, as much as I've been concerned about geographic equity, I do think that this is an important lever if we really want to hit our greenhouse gas targets. And so, but also having to understand the reality. So I appreciate your advocacy there. And I like hearing that there's some acceptance. It sounds like, I know you said no promises. The last thing I was going to ask is, what does compliance look like? Do we know, are these going to be fines, fees? If a company is not compliant or does not have a plan, doesn't meet kind of those requirements?
So the AQCC, as a regulatory body, they are enabled by legislation to fine already. So they've already told us they're not going to articulate in the rule the specific fines for not complying with this e-trip rule. And that is causing a lot of uncertainty and a lot of fear, I'd say, because the regulatory authority is enabled by legislation to fine up to $20,000 per day. Now, this is because they're overseeing big polluters. And if those folks are not meeting the regulations. It's really devastating for the entire air quality of our region. So I don't think they're going to be finding at that level, but that's the top of the bar of what they're enabled by legislation to fine. And they're not articulating in the rule. So there's that grief. I would say the words that are coming out of the division's mouth, and this is going to be the staff that's actually looking to make sure that people are in compliance. They want to be flexible and they want to see a good faith effort by employers. They're saying at these meetings, they recognize that employers can't mandate that employees commute a certain way, but they're saying if you develop programs to make it an easy choice for employees to either choose to drive themselves or choose a different option because it's well supported, they're hopeful that employees will be much more likely to choose that. As far as what designates out of compliance, you have 3 years to prepare an E-trip plan and to try to reduce the SOV rate that's happening at your office. If you don't hit the SOV rate goal for 3 years, then you're technically out of compliance. And the rule specifies that you need to have a conversation with division staff about alternative compliance plans. And that is like doing work and investing in things in your industry that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions that you as an employer are making outside of commuting. But they also, I think, are going to be flexible with folks. There's no guarantee, and I think that that's been difficult for everyone to accept. They don't want to write an exception into the rule. They don't want to write good faith effort into the rule because they're afraid that people aren't going to then put a good faith effort. But I think we're hoping that they're going to be flexible with employers. If you can see the rate is coming down, it's just not hitting that target quite yet. I think that they're going to work with someone versus if there's a cavalier business that's just not doing any work, I think they're going to maybe focus and there'll be an example of what's going to happen to someone who does not comply, but that's going to be 3 years away from now.
Okay. Thank you. I really appreciate this.
I see Karen has some notes in the chat. 34 different groups have been given party status to address AQCC on influencing the rule. So I know we're all going to look to that August hearing to see what comes out of that for those, how they're going to comply. We had this discussion actually yesterday in Smart Commute, and some of the concerns were who is going to know if they comply or don't comply? How is that going to be checked on with so many different groups to be looking at? So I think there's a lot of questions still out there. Anyone else, questions or comments about this topic? Well, I'm surprised I don't see any hands. This is always a hot one. All right, well, let's keep going then.
Okay, this one's mine, Chair. I think I'll just say 2 things before I start the presentation. One is that Smart Commute will come back and give you a report every month as this AQCC hearing, rulemaking, regulation process goes forward, and want to assure you that we will be available for resource, toolkit, survey help, all of those kinds of things as it becomes apparent as to what employers need to do in order to comply with this rule. Please look at us as a resource, and also the other TMAs within the Denver metro region. We're all together in this. We're a consolidated group in this, and we're under the auspices of Dr. Cog's Way to Go program. I'm going to give a quick update on 3 transportation bills that came through, with the caveat that we're going to do a very deep dive on this next month. We're going to have CDOT come in and give a fairly in-depth presentation about the implications of this and this particular bill and others for the state and for the next 10 years in the state and for the 10-year plan. But we're just going to give you a quick overview today on this. So the first one I want to talk about is Senate Bill 260. What's very interesting about this bill is it really transforms transportation funding through new fee revenue instead of through a question to the voters to increase taxes to support transportation. You who have been here for a while remember that we looked at 110 that had, I think, about $9 billion program for improvements across the state, small and large, that did not pass when it went to the voters. So this is transformative in that we're looking at new fee revenue to do this. And our own Faith Winter and Matt Gray were instrumental in putting this together with the help of CDOT and others. This also aligns environmental planning. We just talked about the greenhouse gas roadmap, and this aligns environmental planning and coordination with future transportation projects, which makes all the sense in the world since transportation has one of the biggest chunks of greenhouse gas emissions in the state. Next slide, please. This slide really just pulls out the amount of money that's going to be available. It's ongoing stable funding from the new fees with anticipated 10-year revenues for CDOT. So if you look at these revenues, you will see that they are 10-year revenues, although some of them will be more front-loaded than the others. In the greenhouse gas roadmap, we're looking at trying to make some significant changes at least by 2030. And so some of this funding will probably be upfront in order to make some changes. So the CDOT portion of the Highway Users Trust Fund will bring in 1.28 billion, and local Highway Users Trust Fund will have 947 million. The Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise, which is a new name for the existing bridge enterprise, adds tunnels to this enterprise and puts a substantial amount of money, 522.8 million, into that bucket. This enterprise is an ongoing enterprise that started out with the FASTER Fund a number of years ago, if you remember that. And then the revitalizing Main Streets program that has been so successful for CDOT in the state of Colorado to do the kinds of things that will encourage pedestrian use, bike use, and accommodate restaurant use within areas of each jurisdiction that goes after these funds, which in fact changes the landscape of those areas to reduce vehicle traffic. We'll have 85 million in that pot. And then the multimodal and mitigation fund is 450 million. And I think there's still some question, particularly at the Transportation Commission, about what kinds of things can these funds pay for. It used to be called the MMOF fund. And I think it has enhanced the ability to use these funds for more things than we did in the past. So we'll be giving you a bigger update on that next month. And Public Transit Enterprise, 135 million in that pot. Next slide, please. This is Senate Bill 260 still, and this creates two new enterprises without CDOT. There's a number of new enterprises being created, two new ones for CDOT, ones that CDOT will oversee and most likely have a Transportation Commission member assigned, as well as appointments from the governor to these. The Clean Transit Enterprise will help with the replacement of existing gasoline and diesel transit vehicles with electric motor vehicles, 289 million. And then the non-attainment air pollution mitigation enterprise will really work to mitigate environmental health impacts of increased pollution in non-attainment areas. Those non-attainment areas are the same ones that we talked about in ETRP, 184 million. At this point, I'm not exactly sure what this fund will pay for, but we believe that there should be money in here to perhaps help communities find collaborative shuttle services or increased ability to reduce employer SOV by putting some money into ETRP for funding the TMOs that are going to help run these programs. Speculative on my part. Next slide, please. This is another transportation bill that came through, SB 265, and this really is one that the Joint Budget Committee dedicates 124 million to State Highway Fund, and that fund is flexible, not specified. TC and the Budget Office can prioritize this funding. And the next slide, please. And this is the final one. I just want to give you an overview of. Many of you know a lot about this. It's SB 238. We had Jim Suby and Spencer Dodge come and speak to us recently about Front Range Passenger Rail and the commission. This creates a rail district along the Front Range that becomes the largest special district in the state. The governance structure will bring sales and lodging tax question to local ballots to fund rail lines. It seems to me it's very similar to the RTD fast tracks question, in that those that are within the catchment area will vote on whether or not to be part of the district, but the majority rules. And so everyone within that catchment district, if this passes, will be included in that special district, whether they voted for it or not, or whether they supported it or not. And the new rail district replaces the Southwest Chief Front Range Rail Commission that was previously housed under CDOT. It's a separate agency with appointments from the governor on that special district. That's really the overview I had. As I say, we're going to give you an in-depth overview next month, but wanted to at least touch on these. And I'm sure many of your jurisdictions have lobbyists who have given you a lot of information about this. And I see Megan McKillop is on here as well. And if there's questions I can't answer, perhaps Megan can. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Any questions from anyone? I know this is a lot of information and we'll definitely get a deeper dive next month, but for now, any questions or comments or something that you'd like to know more about next month? I see nothing. We all must be asleep or suffering from the cotton that's blowing around. All right, moving on.
This one is me, Chair. Just quickly, Smart Commute is really excited to be out there in the community again at these biking events and other events that are taking place kind of across the North Metro. We had a great experience at the Baseline event earlier this month up in Broomfield, encouraging biking and the new trail systems that are going in up there. And we have a series of rides that are taking place sponsored by various communities across the region. Tonight, North Glen is hosting another full moon bike ride, and Catherine will be there as a member of their HEAL committee, their Healthy and Active Living Committee. And this is a picture of me at their bike ride last month where they had roughly 40 or so folks out there. Happy to be back on bikes. And I was getting some feedback here from this lady about dangerous crossings in the area that will bring back some feedback to these communities at the end of the summer. You can see all the events here as we head into July, some scavenger hunts and some more full moon bike rides that we're excited about. Again, if you have information about upcoming events that you'd like Smart Commute to be a part of, we're excited to be back out there in the community and engaging with folks as often as we can. I'll take questions or comments, of course, but that's all I had. Chair.
Thank you. Questions or comments? I know we saw this presentation yesterday also. It sounds like it was a really good turnout. I know a lot of people are just excited to get out there again. I don't see any, so we'll keep going. Thanks, Carson. All right, so looking at the RTD Fair Study input presentation. So it looks like we've got Deborah Johnson and Bill Saroy.
So good morning to all of you, and thank you so much, Madam Chair and members of NATA, for the opportunity to be before you this morning. Wanted to introduce the concept to you of what we're endeavoring to embark upon relatively soon as relates to a fair study and equity analysis. As you all know, and you've heard me speak about this before in this forum, as relates to where we are at RTD with our fairs. I have engaged with many of you, and I have learned through my engagements upon arriving to this region that our fairs are a point of contention, recognizing that they are very complicated, cumbersome, and difficult to understand. And with that may be barriers to entry for a broad brush segment of our greater public. To that end, what we are endeavoring to do, recognizing that there have been pilot programs and additionally there's other past programs that may not have a lot of consistency or synergy amongst an overarching approach. What we are doing is peeling back the layers of the onion and delving in to do an in-depth analysis following the guidelines specified by the Federal Transit Administration. And what we are doing today, prior to developing a scope of work to embark upon this very expansive and robust study and analysis, is to engage with not only internal members of this organization being RTD, but external community engagement. So we can really focus on key stakeholders, so we can basically walk away understanding the myriad of different pain points, so we can help address that. One thing's for certain as we go through this endeavor, it's going to be unlike any fair study and equity analysis that this district has undertaken before in reference to leveraging a myriad of different population segments, looking at what we qualify as safe harbor languages within the region, of which there are 21. So with that as a backdrop, as we go through this, my team and I want to acknowledge all of their work, because when I put this forward to the team collectively, they rallied around this and took this on with great vigor, recognizing the importance of this all, because we expect this to yield great dividends for all of us as a region, and perhaps level the playing field in reference to creating greater access to our system. And more specifically, I'd just like to share as well, having just recently met with our regional FTA administrator, and we were talking about this aspect. FTA has been quite supportive in relationship to the steps that we are taking, and have offered to engage if individuals have questions from a technical aspect relative to understanding the process that we're embarking upon. So with that, I would like to yield the floor to my colleague, Bill Soroy, who is an integral part of an overarching team here at the RTD that comprises of not only our planning department, but most specifically within civil rights, our transit equity arm, as well as our our revenue group, as well as government relations and communications, quite naturally. So with that, Bill, I'll yield the floor to you, and thank you so much for your opportunity, for your attention and the opportunity to engage.
Thank you, General Manager Johnson. And why don't we go to the next slide then? I think General Manager Johnson hit on a lot of this in terms of the reason why we're doing the FAIR study. A little bit on the FTA guidance that General Manager Johnson spoke about. Some of the requirements that they require us to move forward with, which like General Manager Johnson alluded to, extensive stakeholder outreach is part of the process, making sure that we hit, all members of our customer base, and particularly those that are most vulnerable. Related to that, doing a fair equity of analysis of any kind of proposed permanent change, which, a permanent fair change is proposed as anything that lasts longer than 6 months. And then one of the key aspects of this, and I think one of the things believe that's been talked about some folks on this call before, is making sure that we have up-to-date transit ridership data that we can use to help with our analysis of fares and the impacts of changing those fares. And that is a key kind of element that we have to pull together, because again, the data that we've had and that we've used in the past is pretty old. It's 2015 data, so we need to update that. So the FAIR study process, and I know this has been a point of concern by some, will take about 18 months to complete. A lot of that is related to, the requirements for FTA and the requirements for the data that we have to actually collect upfront in order to make things work. So we will be hiring a consultant. We are, like I said, like General Manager Johnson said, we are using the process this summer, and with this group and others to get feedback on our current fare structure, and then hopefully use that to inform the scope for our consultant that we intend to procure in late summer, early fall. So with that, go to the next slide, please. So a little bit of background on kind of our fare structure, first talking about kind of the purpose and types of fares that are out there. So next slide. So, the purpose of fares, obviously, defining what a fare is. I mean, a fare is a fee paid by a customer, but really one of the things, what is it used for? In the case of RTD, fares make up a significant portion of our revenues. Pre-pandemic, our fare revenue covered about 15 to 20% of our overall budget. So that's a fairly significant piece in terms of looking at, the future of transit, how that relates to all the things that we want to do or can do. So it's important to understand that in the context of, how we, if we changing our fares, what impact does that have on our budget? The other thing I think you're looking at fares, what it does is helps to match demand to capacity. What does that mean? We have many factors that contribute to what kind of service that we can provide. And then matching that service to our fares, I think, is an important thing. Things like labor, rail lines, and other kind of infrastructure aspects. Next slide, please. So the types of fares that are out there, and this is kind of the whole laundry list of things that you can look at. A fixed fare, which is set price, just one price for everybody. A zone-based fare, which we have, which price of your ticket is based upon how many fare zones you travel through. A distance-based fare is much kind of based on the distance that you travel. Any of you that have been to Washington, D.C. and used the metro system there, that is a distance-based fare where depending on the station you get on and the station that you get off, you can pay a different fare. Then there's a variable fare, which really relates to time of day, and this can be related to things like peak hour fares that are different from midday fares. So those are the types of fares. Now, next slide, please. Now, what we have at RTD is kind of a hybrid because we do have a flat fare. We have a local and regional fare, or local and limited bus service fare, which is a flat fare of $3. We also have a zone-based fare, which is really on the rail side, which I think many of you are familiar with in terms of having 3 zones, and depending on how many zones you travel through, you'll be charged a different fare. And then we have an airport zone. Again, anybody traveling in and out of that airport zone pays a specific fare. There's also a distance-based fare on our regional bus service and Skyride service if you're not traveling to and from the airport. So again, we have a complicated system of a hybrid of fares. Next slide, please. Next slide. So our fare structure, in terms of what we have in place, I mean, we have, like I said, we have a local, regional, airport fare, and this actually was changed in 2016 as a result of the last kind of major fares study that we did in 2015, which basically reduced the levels from, there was 4 levels before, but there was a express fare that we eliminated and tried to make it a little bit simpler. And have the airport fare kind of added, because this is, again, was the implementation of the A line. Next slide, please. Here's the fare zone boundary map that I referred to earlier. This, I know some of you are familiar with in terms of how we look at fares. Anyone traveling between more than 2 zones, so anybody traveling from zone A to zone C would be paying a regional fare. Anyone traveling within zone A and B would pay the local fare. Next slide, please. The fare products, in terms of the different products that people can buy, to purchase our fares. I mean, obviously there's a 3-hour pass, which is an unlimited pass. This was something that was changed in 2018 to deal with the issue of transfers and an issue that people had about concerns about either accounting for transfers or charging for transfers. We felt this would accommodate that. I think this is actually fairly long in terms of in comparison to our peers. A day pass, obviously being able to buy your trips to have unlimited trips to the day, monthly, and then pass and then Access-a-Ride. Next slide, please. And we have a variety of discounts that we do offer to different segments of the population. We have federally mandated fares discounts related to seniors and people with disabilities, and that's a 50% off. We do have 2 other discounts. On the use side, we have a 70% discount, which again, this was increased as a result of the past program working group process that occurred in 2018. It was increased from 50 to 70% as a result of kind of that process. In addition, during that process, we did develop and implement a low-income based discount program, which is really a 40% discount for those at 185% of the federal poverty level or lower. And that is really intended to be a means-based discount, providing that people can account for their income. And we've been working through some community-based groups within the different counties and primarily within the city of Denver to address that means testing. Next slide, please. And our pricing, and I know this is a point of contention, but those and saying we have some of the highest prices in the country, which I don't think we dispute in terms of the face value of our passes, our costs. And one of the things that we want to address as part of this effort. I think the other thing that we have maybe that's somewhat unique across the country is our discount levels. I don't think a lot of people have the level of discounts that we have. And if you go to the next slide, another thing that we have that's somewhat unique, I think, is our pass programs. We do have, 3 types of pass programs: EcoPass, Neighborhood EcoPass, and College Pass. And this is an insurance-based system, which again, basically, if you have an example could be if you have 100 people that are working in a business and they want to get an EcoPass, that all 100 people have to get the pass. But if only 20% of those people are actually using transit, then they're priced appropriately. So it's a severe it's a deep discount for those that actually get to use it. So it is a unique system, I think, and we want to take a look at this as well, because I think we've heard some concerns expressed about the way this is done. There were some changes made to these programs as part of the PASS program working group in 2018 as well. And so I think we do want to take a look at that. Next slide. And so this is just really a summary of just saying this is a graphic of all the PASS products that PASS and FAIR products that we offer. You can see it's a quite extensive and the level and nature of our passes and fares. I think to some people it's quite complicated, and to others and maybe there's an opportunity because they can find a unique fare product that fits them. But I think we want to address this as part of the fare study and get feedback on our fare structure and our PASS programs so that we can make changes to make it the most appropriate to serve our customers. And so the next slide is what we would like to do. One of the parts that we want to do as part of this, many of you I know have participated in Mentimeter surveys before. And at this point, I'm going to ask Chris Quinn, I know who's got it propped up on his screen, to if I can have Carson stop sharing his screen and have Chris Quinn share his, we can start with a Mentimeter exercise. So what I'll ask people to do is if people could log in, if you hopefully have your smartphone by your side, and log into www.menti.com, and hopefully Chris will be able to share his screen so we can pop it up.
Just made Chris the host. Hopefully this works. Thanks for hanging with us.
All right. There we go. So if you could type in the code 1080-31-2 after you've got to the menti.com on your browser, you should be able to go and start answering these questions. We've had a series of questions really at a very high level just to get some sense of one, if you've been using transit, and two, kind of what your opinions are of our current fare structure. So I can see people populating it now, that some people have been using it. And again, just welcome you to do this, and you can do this at your own pace. Hopefully as you answer this question, you can move on to the next. The other thing I'll just say as people start answering this is we do have a series of demographic related questions at the end that we'd love for you to fill out if you'd be willing to do so. We won't show those obviously at the end, but we'd certainly encourage you to fill those out. So it looks like we're getting some responses here. We got about 15 people that have worked on this. So I will just continue on here. Why don't we go to the next slide, Chris? All right. Be able to go to the next slide? Uh-oh. Well, we'll keep working on this one. I think the next, if I'm right, the next question. Let me get it up on my screen here. Oh, there we go. Sorry. So, have you ever used RTD services of any kind? And then just, we'll keep getting just a sense of how often and what services people have used. Let's move on to the next question, Chris. Which of the following describes your attitudes towards the fairs? So this is, again, trying to understand where people are at and how difficult or easy is it on your end to understand. Again, getting some good responses in terms of people finding it that is somewhat difficult or very difficult to understand. So again, good feedback from you all. And next question. And then, so understanding why you think it's too difficult. Again, zone map, prefer car. Honestly, don't know how those zone passes work. Traveling between zones. So again, understanding this is great feedback for us as we engage a consultant to understand some of the reasons why for your concerns. Next slide. Next question, please, Chris. So what aspects of RTD's fare structure you think work well? Okay, so we're getting some response on this. Looks like some folks don't think there's much. So, but again, trying to understand if there are aspects that we should look to keep or that you think work well is important for us as we look to potentially evaluate the entire fare system. Okay. All right, seeing some stuff pop up here. Okay. Great. All right. Okay, why don't we move to the next question, Chris? So what aspects of RTD's fare structure need the most improvement? So I think we've heard that. So eliminating the zones, bus fares are set and don't change based on where you go. I think that should be simple and affordable. A lot of what we have heard is a simplified system. I think we've tried to do some of that in the last round. Like I said, we eliminated one of our fare categories, the express fare. But again, it's like I showed on that slide, it's a lot of different options, and it can be daunting to people, as they trying out our system. Okay, great. All right, so well, I'll let you kind of finish up those questions, and then we have a series of demographic questions at the end. And what I would like to do next, so we'll keep this open for a few minutes and let you all kind of finish this up, and maybe we can switch back the screen, I think, on Carson's end. And so Chris, maybe, I don't know, Carson, if you want to stop sharing, and then we can go to ending the presentation here.
Yeah, Chris, you should be able to click on my name under more and make me the host again.
Great.
Carson, are you back on or?
I am.
Okay.
Let's see. Let me share my screen.
All right, go to the next slide. And let's just skip to the last slide, and then we'll go with discussion. So as we kind of go forward, and thank you all again for providing your input, and we'll go to discussion in a second. But the next steps, like I said, we're going through and doing a series of meetings with the cross section of stakeholders this summer to get some input into the scope that we hope to release this late summer. Then we select a consultant and issue a notice to proceed before the end of the year, and then move forward essentially next year with the process and the analysis and outreach. The idea that our board would get preliminary recommendations in the fall and then be able to vote on those, and then we would be able to implement those hopefully in the first or second quarter of next year, or excuse me, of 2023. So again, it's a long process. And again, there's a reason why it's a process because of some of the requirements from FTA. But with that, why don't we kind of stop sharing the screen and just open it up to any questions that the group may have.
Thank you, Bill. Any questions or comments? I know that we had some in the chat. That anybody want to ask direct questions? I don't see any hands going up. I guess I do have a question. So there was, there we go. There we go. My quick question is just about the FAIR study with the ridership. So there's been some issues recently, and I know that we're not the only one on the end line, that there are no ticket checkers when you get on the train. And so I'm guessing it has to do with a lot of the other issues with staff shortages. And so how do we get ridership numbers to be accurate if there's nobody there actually checking?
Yeah, I'm not the person to, I don't know.
I can address that question, Bill. So basically what we do have on our rail cars are what we call automatic passenger counters. So when people do board, we can extrapolate boarding information as it relates to ridership. And so that's how we garner who is actually on the system. Sometimes it's not totally accurate as you use artificial intelligence relative to misconstruing, you know, a bag or a briefcase, but for all intents and purposes, we use what we call APCs for that. And we have those on board buses as well as our rail cars.
Okay, thanks, Deborah. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Joan, I see your hand, and Karen as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question, I know that when the Fast Tracks was first built, as well as the bus system, RTD decided not to have the, and I don't really know what they're called, but purchasing tickets through a gate, and you weren't allowed to get on, the gate wouldn't open or whatever, unless you purchased the ticket. My question is, what would the cost of building those now versus the cost of having ticket checkers in? Would that help with ridership, with collecting the correct fares, et cetera, versus hiring ticket checkers or security on these trains and buses?
One thing I can say, you know, in the past, I know this issue has been brought up, and we've looked at it and looked at the cost benefit of, and some people use the term hardening of stations, which means that you have a hard line to get in and out of the station to the fare paid zone. People have looked at that. I think there is a significant cost to that. You know, and from a light rail standpoint, most light rail systems around the country aren't done in that way. But if you look at, you know, systems like BART or Metro, they do obviously have that. I think in the cost benefit that we've done based upon our current fare checking operations, I mean, the cost benefit is we have a fairly high, you know, fare, what's the right word? Non-fare evasion rate. I think it's like 96 or 94 at one point, I know, was the figure in terms of people that are paying versus not paying. And so I think at the point that I know in the past when we've looked at this, I think the cost benefit is that, you know, with our current system of random fare checks, that it's been working fairly well, and that the cost of hardening the stations wouldn't be worth it in terms of, you know, the benefit that we would get by making that hard requirement for people to have a ticket going into a station. So at least that's what we've looked at in the past. Certainly, I know that we could look at it now, given kind of the new normal under COVID, but certainly I know that that's kind of what past analysis has shown us.
And so, Bill, if I may just add on some additional information, thank you so much for the question. It's a good one. So you're talking about what we qualify as a closed system, and recognizing what Bill did talk about when you look at light rail, most entities are proof of payment, which is based on the honor system. And for all intents and purposes, as we make advancements relative to electronic payment and things of the like, for all intents and purposes, when somebody is using an app, we have a greater potential to decrease fare evasion because you're purchasing your fare in advance, if most people possess that integrity going forward. There have been some instances, and I actually was at a transit agency that looked at closing their system. It actually was LA Metro. Some of the issues in doing that now is basically the right-of-way and permitting and ADA requirements. If you look at our light rail system in one of the older lines that basically are street running and are very narrow, we don't have the right-of-way space in reference to doing that. So when you think about it in those terms, leveraging that aspect of engaging with jurisdictions and taking away traffic lanes and creating enough space to have people in mobility devices that could have adequate turning radii and things of alike, that does increase exponentially, as opposed to us investing in I would call, as I call them, POP, proof of payment representatives that use handhelds to check as we have now currently, but that could be expanded, and overall that would be less expensive in the grand scheme of things. But that's just anecdotally, just from my past experience working at various systems that have a multitude of these different initiatives in place to verify proof of payment.
Okay, thank you.
Karen, go ahead. And then Anita, I see your hand as well.
Thank you. Thank you, General Manager Johnson and Chris Quinn and Bill Sroy, for allowing us to see this presentation and have some input. I'd like to know if you can keep it open for feedback for maybe the rest of the day, and let us who weren't able to connect to the Mentimeter go in and give you some input. If that's possible, then we'll send out the link to NATA right after this meeting to do that. I'm sure you're as frustrated as we are in your stakeholder community that a fair discussion will take 2 years to implement. And part of the reason I'm very frustrated about this is that you just heard our presentation on the employee trip reduction program regulation that's coming up. And many of us who run transportation management organizations believe transit is the absolutely best way to reduce emissions in a metro area. It's an option that more people are willing to take than getting into a carpool or a van pool. And many employers can't do flexible schedules or work from home. And so because it's 2 years delayed, I worry about us not being able to use that as an option to employers to get people out of their cars. The other thing is you at RTD are trying to build back ridership. And the best way to build back ridership, of course, is to make it as easy as possible for riders and as equitable as possible for the fare. I was on that past program working group that took us a long time to come up with the new fares that not all of us agreed with. And anytime on one end you have a lot of giveaways, on the other end you have expanded cost. It's the elasticity of the way the system works. And so I'm really eager to see this new discussion come up, but really frustrated by the 2-year lag. I'm sure you guys are too, but just wanted to let you know that we in the TMO community really believe transit and adequate transit to employers and to all the areas that pay into the transportation district sales tax really do want to see this transit expanded and adequately serve everyone within your taxing district. Thank you.
And Karen, to address your first question, yes, we can keep the Mentimeter open to the end of the day. So we'll keep it open till 5, and then we'll close it at that point. And just to your point, one of the things that we have heard loud and clear of people's frustration about the time. One of the things that we are trying to do, and maybe this is new for General Manager Johnson, but we are trying to accelerate the long lead item of the survey, because we know that is a piece that is going to take a while, because it's critical information when we're doing fare modeling about the impacts of potential fare changes. So we're trying to fast track that and kind of do that through a separate process to hopefully minimize the time and effort that we have through the process and through the analysis.
Anita, did your hand go down or did you still have a question?
My hand went down. I was going to echo similar to what Karen just went through. And I guess the one thing I would say is there's an extra burden because the process does take so long, recognizing that's out of RTD's hands to get it right. And, you know, I know we were saying we were looking at some of that data, you know, it can't be more than 5 years, but when you add the 2 years on top of it, it's already more than half a decade old by the time that what we're learning from it is being implemented. And so just, I guess, that additional caution, but thank you, Karen, and thank you, Bill, and Director Johnson.
And I just want to say thank you all very much for your comments, and you all hit the nail on the head. We too are frustrated recognizing that we have to adhere to this process. And I would say there is the potential, but I want to manage expectations to the best of my abilities. That, as Bill said, it could be less than 18 months. And so as we go through this process, quite naturally, we may garner a lot of information that's useful, and recognizing as we talk about the potential of enticing customers to utilize the system, we need to ensure that we have an overarching plan in doing so. And so that's paramount and top of mind for all of us. And as you all know, we all collectively want to hear your ideas and suggestions, because all of those are good ones, especially looking through the lenses of those that are impacted by the barriers to entry. So I thank you all for your information, and we'll do whatever we can to the best of our ability to shorten the time without decreasing or minimizing or impacting the integrity of the process, so we can ensure that we have a system that works for us long-term. Thanks.
And good morning, Julie. I see your hand up.
Good morning. I actually have a process question. And so is there going to be, a process put in place moving forward to regularly, collect or I don't know if there's a way to continuously do an equity analysis, but so for example, the data that our most recent data is from 2015, right? That's a really long time ago. So what steps is RTD going to take to not have such of a lag in that data collection process? Because your data has to be used within 5 years. So 5 years from now, how do we not have this kind of really long drawn out process? Is there any way to make this process a little more efficient in the future, I guess is my question.
So if I can take that on, just collectively, as we talk about this, RTD also is embarking upon and enhancing what we call our Title VI program. It's a requirement, but we're going above and beyond. I have to tell you, just recently, I have been engaging with our transit equity staff, meeting on a monthly basis as we look to update that so we can put mechanisms in place. While we were doing some things, we have an opportunity to do things a lot more efficiently, going better, having a laser-like focus on this. And as we adopt a Title VI program, which we anticipate doing in the beginning of 2022, there'll be robust engagement as well. So this fair equity analysis, service equity analysis, language assistance program, limited English proficiency, all of these are different elements that are in the overarching Title VI program. And right now, this gives us an opportunity as we embarked upon this effort to really enhance that. So what I'll say today, and you can quote me in the future, it should not be like this as we go forward. So we should be at the ready to have this information readily available and be engaged and leverage different community-based organizations, as I talked about, safe harbor languages and all these things that we have in reference to partnerships, so we can ensure that we have the most current data to leverage as we go forward. And this won't be as cumbersome in the near future. So Bill, I don't know if you or Chris want to add something else to what I just mentioned.
Sure. To add to what General Manager Johnson said, I think the other piece of this is that, there are travel surveys, which is again the element that's important, beyond the demographics. Like CDOT is embarking on a travel survey. I know that they're going to be doing in 2022 and 2023. We're certainly going to be part of that, and we can hopefully use that data. So then, the next time we do that, we have that updated data. And there's always constantly, I think, in the region, between DRCOG, RTD, and CDOT, people looking at travel survey information specifically related to the travel model, looking to update that. And we're, you know, like I said, we did our last survey that we did was in 2015. I'm sure we'll probably do one later on. So to have the, like you said, hopefully that updated on a regular basis, either utilizing our data or someone else's data, I think is a critical element that we're certainly looking to take advantage of as others do more surveys themselves.
Great, thank you.
All right, any other questions or comments? I do not see any other hands. I appreciate the information. I'm sure there will be more coming out of that over the next couple of years. All right, let's go ahead and move on. So it looks like we're up to the RTD director's reports.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Vince.
Thanks. And thanks to Deborah and her team for that presentation. I know I and a number of directors are, you know, frustrated about the length of time this is going to take, but understand that, you know, it's a big lift and we're going to get it right. And I'm also heartened when Deborah Johnson says she's also confused by our fares and our system and how it works. And so that gives me hope that we're going to come up with a better and simpler system. In terms of what's going on in District J, where we used to all sit, Westminster, North Glen, Western Thornton, Federal Heights, not a whole lot. I'm getting a lot of calls on the 122X, which is a bus that used to leave from Wagon Road and end up at Civic Center. That route was eliminated when the pandemic hit and hasn't come back. Its replacement really is the 120X that also goes out of Wagon Road and ends up at Union Station, and then requires a second ride, either probably on the free mall ride, you know, down 16th Street to the Civic Center station. I'm getting calls from people that are saying, we really want the 122X. I'm passing those along to our service planning department, and they will keep track of those to see what kind of interests and inquiries we've had. If any of you all hear from people that are interested in that line resuming, please forward those to me so I can get them to our service planning. Other than that, we're in the middle of our strategic planning process for the year, working on that. As you know, we've lifted capacity restrictions on our system and are monitoring what that impact on ridership will be. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thanks, Vince. Can you all hear me okay?
We can hear you, Troy.
Thank you. So, you know, just echoing the frustration on the fare study, we heard a lot about that during the accountability committee meetings. I'm sure Julie would weigh in on that we'd like to push that as quickly as possible. It's key and pivotal, but y'all heard from a very, very talented staff that you know, we do have some hurdles that we need to jump, which are very important ones that you know, keeps us in compliance, so on and so forth. I would like to comment. I see a lot besides Bill and Deborah. I see a lot of staff names on the attendance list, and I always appreciate when we have you know, a number of staff members here in case there's some questions that come up. We have our second strategic planning session Saturday morning, bright and early, in person. This will only be the second in-person meeting we've had. Finally got to meet our new board members in person and look them in the eye and shake hands because we are able to use a large facility to meet. And so we met 2 weeks ago, and we will again on Saturday to really kind of hone in on our 2 or 3 very important priorities. Obviously, they're all important. It's a very heavy lift to boil these down. But we need to do so to give the proper directions for Deborah and numerous staff members that are on this meeting and elsewhere running our system. Continuing to try and monitor, and I've got a little input on the end line with some some strangeness in those operations. We had some issues on Sunday morning with the first route out of Denver, and I need to visit with the staff about that, trying to be as consistent as we can with that service delivery. Beyond that, I don't know that I have much more to add, and I think Director Davidson was able to make the call, which was not for sure. So I'd like Eric to chime in. He's been working on some specific projects with his financial know-how. So Eric, I'll just shift the handoff over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Troy. I appreciate it. And thank you, Vince. Apologies for being audio only here. I am just waiting an appointment. I'm glad I was able to listen in as long as I was here. Just would echo the sentiments of my fellow directors on, certainly the frustration on the time it takes for the FAIR study, but grateful to staff for working through that process. Like many of you, I certainly agree that our fairs can sometimes be a little difficult to understand. I had a good opportunity actually this past week, had some friends visiting. Nice to be able to use the vaccine power that we have here, and had the opportunity to watch them try to figure out fairs when we took the N line into Denver, and deal with schedules and so forth. So certainly experiencing all the same things all of our customers are with changing schedules on the N line and also understanding fare structure. So glad we're taking that one on. The only thing I'll add is if many of you may be aware that we did have a state audit conducted last year. And in addition to finding some issues with our labor practices, there was also some note around our internal audit function itself, which had caught certainly my attention because this was very similar to a note that we were given in 2010 in the state audit 10 years prior. Ms. Johnson brought in a peer review group from APTA to take a hard look at our audit function. We did identify a lot of issues and a lot of opportunities for growth. I have the pleasure of serving with Director Peggy Catlin on the Finance, Audit, and Administration Committee as her vice chair, and we have started to work on addressing these audit issues. It's perhaps not the most exciting topic at RTD, but a very, very important one, and particularly when we look at N-line issues related to our staffing levels. There are a number of risks in the organization that we should be looking at and identifying through our audit function to gain visibility, years in advance, not weeks in advance, when a risk becomes a reality. So we are working very hard on addressing that. I think it'll be an important area of growth for the organization. And with that, I'll yield the floor back and just thank you for continuing to have us involved here and for all of the great input today.
Madam Chair, I think we probably will segue into the Accountability Committee report from Julie or others, but just know that the RTD board will be taking a formalized look at those recommendations later this summer. Accountability Committee meeting comes up on Monday, and then I think finalization in early July, and we have to meet to answer the situations as far as recommendations from that committee. So I'm sure Deborah has that timing down better than I do, and Julie will probably give a far more good overview on that. So I think that's all that I have.
Okay, thanks, Troy. I think we'll go ahead and move into Julie's comments for the recommendations, just because we're running out of time here. We're down to the last 19 minutes, and I imagine we all want to hear about this.
Can I ask a question to the directors just real quickly? So one of the things I wanted to clarify with you guys is how best would you like me to kind of pass on issues or complaints that I'm hearing from residents? So I had my first ward meeting in person, by the way. I was super excited about it a couple of weeks ago. And we did have some people who brought up some RTD concerns. Do you want me just to have, well, I guess obviously Vince is mine, but Vince, do you want me to just have them email you, or is there a phone number, a general phone number that people could call and raise and submit feedback, or how should I manage that as I get it in from residents?
Yeah, whatever's the easiest for them, really. I'm available by email, and my cell phone number is on the RTD website as well. Or if they relay something to you, you can feel free to relay it to me, and I'm happy to go to those board meetings if I wanted to be there. So
Sure, great. It will put you on the agenda for the next one. Okay, great, thank you. And I just wanted to clarify that as I'm starting to meet in person with residents again, all kinds of issues are coming up, and so the best way to reach out to you was helpful. Okay, so I'm going to continue on with this RTD accountability and go over the draft recommendations that we've had. So Karen did send out an email containing the draft recommendation, so everyone could reference that document as I'm kind of going through this process. Next slide, please. All right, so first is the governance subcommittee, which I chaired, and we had essentially one large recommendation that kind of came out of this, and this was the sub-regional service councils, which you guys have heard me talk about previously on this call, but essentially it's establishing or revising the service planning process to include these sub-regional service councils. And the purpose of these councils would be to recommend local transit plans for RTD's board to consider, right? So the service council would make a recommendation and it would still go to the board for approval. That's how kind of like the approval process would work. Of course, I think social equity is a huge concern here, making sure that we're really focusing on those areas that locally we know we have some gaps. And so the membership of this organization or this group would be elected representatives, but also include transit users themselves, right? Because I think that's also a voice that we typically may not include as much. And I think that's something that could be really important, is actually hearing from the people who are using this service and how that service planning is working for them. Now, the recommendation from the Accountability Committee is that RTD establish a work group for regional regional stakeholders to evaluate two things. One is the district. So what are the districts of these service councils going to be? Are they going to be county-based? Are they going to be travel shed-based? And so that was the conversation that we weren't able to kind of hash out in the time that we had. The next one is resource allocation. How are resources going to be allocated with these new service councils? So that was the subcommittee or the sub-regional service council recommendation. Now the RTD board of directors recommendation, we did have some people who wanted to raise this concern of how the board of directors can perhaps work more efficiently. And in the end, we couldn't really grasp at anything more than the recommendations that were outlined here, which are basically after these recommendations that the RTD Accountability put forward are implemented, let's revisit the situation and look at it. Because I also know that as we all know, the board of directors itself is revising how they do some of their work. So at this point, it just wasn't a good time to write any other further recommendations for the board of directors. So it's more of like, let's let the plan and the work unfold, and then let's reevaluate this at a different time. Next slide. So next up was the operations subcommittee. And of course, as you might imagine, fares and pass programs was a huge topic. And we just had a conversation about this. So we all talked about how complex RTD's fare process is. And so the operations subcommittee came out with a couple of recommendations, really just to simplify fares in the pass program, consolidate discounts, identify strategies to simplify pass fares. So establishing a family plan, standardizing even all of the group pass programs. So the Eco Pass, the College Pass, like all those different pass programs, let's standardize those. Incentivize organizations to purchase bulk passes. Let's see, we also talked about, exploring the Connect card. So for example, this would allow users to use transit fares across various entities. So like the CDOT busing and other micro transit and mobility options. So how do we make it easy for users to ride and to pay was kind of the theme of that conversation. The next recommendation was around the operator retention. And this was really just focused on the state auditor's report and their finding around operator retention and human resources. And really the committee agrees with these findings and really supports RTD to implement the proposed recommendations from the state auditor's report. Next slide. So service. The next group of recommendations were really convened around service. And a couple things here. Accessibility and infrastructure was an important conversation, and really just improving accessibility at light rail and fixed route stops. So zero stair entrances, better wayfinding signage, improve audio announcement systems for those with disabilities is super important. We also talked about multimodal transportation, so working with micromobility partners and municipalities to ensure transit stations have diverse mobility options, such as e-bike, scooters, or other things to provide that last mile connection, right? Because we're always talking about that first and last mile connection. And then also service delivery. Of course, Reimagine RTD is doing some work on that. And so I think that was interesting about this process is the RTD Accountability Committee was reevaluating things. Then you have Reimagine RTD, plus you throw in, you know, the new leadership at RTD. It really turned into a complex process. And so I think everyone's just trying to stack up these recommendations in the work. And so service delivery, and one of those things were design easily accessible space at RTD bus and rail stations for individuals with disabilities to access services such as taxis, Ubers, Lyfts, and other transportation providers. So how do we just prioritize the travel needs of those frequent travel users? So that was a really important just conversation. I think there's going to be a lot more that comes out of this from the RTD Reimagine group. All right, next slide is the Northwest Rail and unfinished fast tracks corridors. So overall, the committee supports the Northwest Rail alignment for the Front Range passenger rail, and we recommend that RTD pursue any reasonable partnership opportunities with the Front Range Rail project. And then we also wanted to recommend that there is RTD perform a complete and comprehensive analysis of the Northwest Rail project to establish a common set of assumptions. As we started talking about Northwest Rail, there's so many different sources of information and work going on in this, and a lot of opinions, right? And so having RTD do a comprehensive analysis and really kind of set that bottom line, you know, this is where we're starting from, our simple truth, I think would be a great idea. And then RTD should work with CDOT and DRCOG to implement bus rapid transit projects in the Northwest region and really kind of implementing those NAM studies recommendations. For those who are following along in the document, there is a bullet 6 on this page. And based off of some feedback that we got from the Northwest Rail community, it was decided that this bullet just be removed since it was controversial. I don't know, yeah, there was just a lot of question about the benefits of that bullet 6. So that was removed from the final report. And then for using the federal COVID relief funds, you know, I feel like we've talked about this one, so I'm actually going to skip this one. So next slide, and then next slide after that. So let's talk about partnerships real quick. I know we're running out of time. And so really this partnerships conversation was, how do we establish new and leverage existing partnerships to improve service efficiency and grow ridership And then how do we use some of those federal funds to expand on these partnerships? And how do we develop a competitive innovation grant to really fund those bold ideas to increase ridership? So those were some of those recommendations. Next slide. And then we have transparency and reporting. So really, and I'll also group in the financial performance conversation in this a lot. RTD's website has lots of information and they have large budgets, right, that they're working with. And so the final conversations were about how do we be more transparent and have a standard reporting process around some of these metrics, such as operational effectiveness. You know, are you increasing your ridership? How can we, as the public and laypersons, really see that quick and easy? And that goes for financial transparency as well. How can we have a one-page summary of RTD's budget planning process that's easy to understand? How can RTD make it, especially the transportation conversation or the funding conversation, more understandable to laypersons? So can they create videos to help explain their budget? How do they, are we making sure that we're defining all of these terms like bus rapid transit and all of these, you know, that fare box revenue, all of these things that, you know, honestly, probably some of us get kind of confused about. So overall, how can RTD work better at, you know, being more transparent about some of these metrics that are available in these in these recommendations, and just make it more accessible to people? So that's a quick overview of the recommendations. As for timeline, we do have a meeting on the 28th, and that's when we're supposed to be adopting these final recommendations. Of course, if anybody still has any feedback, I'm open to any ears. We did have a survey that went out earlier this month, and we got a lot of great feedback. And I know that our co-chairs have been attending various meetings throughout the region and also getting feedback from there as well. So that is a quick, brief overview of the draft recommendations. Please review the document. There's a lot of good stuff here. Questions, Joan?
Thank you. This is real fast. I have to say that I am disturbed that the committee put the completion of the Northwest Corridor out to 2036, but BRT for 2026. And it seems like the governor's mandate for 2026 was kind of ignored. And I personally am going to have a really difficult time pushing voting for another special district when we absolutely get nothing from this special district at all. I would recommend that RTD have a committee to look at grant funding on all the millions of dollars coming down for transportation, specifically for rail, and to just ignore that and push it aside. Now is the time. Now is the time to do this. If RTD expects to raise taxes in the future, which they should have done 5 or 10 years ago in order to pay for some of the things that we aren't getting now, I just cannot push voting for another district when we are not telling RTD to actively look for dollars to finish these unfinished corridors. Is not that their job to go out? We have all this funding coming down. So I'm really disappointed actually in the committee, once again, pushing us out to a date that will again be pushed out. We're going down the exact same road RTD has put us on since 2004. So yeah, I just can't accept that at all.
Okay, and so Joan, just a point of clarification. So that was in that 6th bullet. That whole recommendation is being removed from these final recommendations. We're not going to be including this in the final recommendations. So it's only bullets 1 through 5 that will be included in the final recommendations. But I agree with you that we probably should look at, you know, is there stronger language that we could do about encouraging RTD to look at other funds to finish this rail. So let me bring that recommendation and your thoughts back to my group, and then we can talk about that, okay?
Thank you, Julie. I thought that the draft recommendation, I looked at both of them that Karen sent us. One of them said the final, and I just went out and looked at it, and bullet point 6 and 7 were still there. So is that not the final? I'm confused.
So yeah, the final, we actually have not approved the final yet. And so it was my understanding that bullet 6 is being removed from the final recommendations, but I could clarify that for you and make sure that that is.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
And so thanks, Julie and Joan. I see Anita has her hand up. I want to just do a quick check-in. We only have a couple minutes and we still have another presentation on the e-bikes. Karen, is there a way to move that to the next meeting, or just looking at our timer?
We can move it to the next meeting. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go ahead and take Anita's question.
Thank you, and I apologize for being I guess participating so much. We definitely are going over time, but I think it's because we're all so interested in this topic. I just wanted to give my full-throated rather support of folding the committee recommendations into our previous conversation, the RTD equity and fair study. It just feels like every single one of those points is so relevant to that analysis. So I'm really hoping that that'll be a big part of the look.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, Anita, right? Because these are just recommendations from our committee. And so the next step is actually the harder step of actually implementing these. And that's where the board of directors is really going to come in, and RTD staff, and especially some of these other regional work groups that we're proposing. You know, whether or not that work moves forward, I think, you know, those are the next steps that that the board has to kind of set the direction on, and then go from there.
Yeah, so I guess that leads a little bit to my concern when we look at the RTD timeline, right? And then the next steps proposed. I don't want to miss a window that you know, we have to strike while this process is going. Otherwise, it's a long time to change the rate structures again. And so I hope they will be folded, those recommendations will be folded in, even if they're not fully vetted through the other processes that you recommend. Does that make sense to everybody? And I guess while we have RTD on the phone or on the call, I just really wanted to highlight my support for that approach.
Yeah, I think it makes sense, Anita. Thanks. So we'll wait for the final recommendations to go through. It sounds like there's still a little bit more room for conversation on that. So Julie, appreciate the work you're doing on that and the reporting out. All right, I'm going to end us pretty abruptly because we're dropping off. We're losing some people to their other 9 o'clock meeting. So I appreciate everybody hanging out for another minute here. And I'm sure we'll have more questions on this next month as well. All right, so with that, we'll go ahead and end and see everybody next month.